Obviously, culture is super important and you want to get the right hires in because having the right hires in is going to impact the culture. There had been roles that had been open for like over a year
Wow.
just because they didn't have any recruiting. They didn't have anybody owning that process.
What are the top things that you would advise and you would give to a talent leader coming into the same position?
What is your overall strategy? Thinking about like the different metrics. What is the mission statement of the company and tying everything together?
But I'm hearing a lot more talent leaders looking for less like super specialized people, but people who have that ability to be adaptable because of the landscape shifting so much over the last few years.
Being more critical with hiring and taking a slower approach, I would just want to make sure I get the right person in the door.
Hello and welcome to Hiring on All Cylinders. Today I'm joined by Alexa Lane of Placements.io, and we're talking about building recruiting operations from scratch. So I know this is a topic that a lot of people are interested in, whether you're joining a new company that hasn't got much there, or it's your first time implementing kind of recruiting operations. How's it going?
Good. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
I guess the first place to start is, how do you, if you're walking into a new environment or you're thinking about building like a foundational recruiting operations framework, how do you know where to start? Like, how do you actually start that journey?
Yeah, that's a great question. I can speak from personal experience because the current company I'm at, Placements.io, was a completely blank slate. So built everything from scratch there. So I think in terms of what you have to think about, you need to come up with a strategy and you need to partner with both the founder or the founders of the company and also the different stakeholders of the company and figure out what are the hiring needs in terms of both long-term goals and short-term goals, and then prioritize what those roles are. What are the most critical roles? Are they going to be product? Are they going to be engineering? Are they going to be sales in order to drive revenue? And then you can start thinking about approaching it from a holistic view, thinking about using data to come up with decisions in terms of like what KPIs are you going to be measuring, thinking about time to fill, candidate source, things like that. And then from there, you can start thinking about like what are the company values, what's the mission statement, things like that. And then once you have all that kind of sorted out, then you can start thinking about like what are the different recruiting operations in terms of like building out different ATS and different functions in that sense.
Yeah. So when you're, there's a lot of, it sounds like a lot of information gathering at that first, the first point. How do you go about gathering that information, storing that and making sense of it and organizing it all? Like, what's your approach there?
Yeah. So when I first came into my company, other companies I'd worked at prior, we had actual recruiting operations set up, but we didn't have anything. We were just using a Google Doc.
Classic.
So yeah, we were doing quite a bit of hiring. Like we had about 7 or 8 open recs at the time. And I know we needed to source all of the information in terms of candidates and all the job descriptions and everything like that. So I knew we had to implement an ATS and start thinking about other things as well, like HR tools that are going to be integrated with that and background checks and things like that. So then I started to set up demos with different ATS systems. Some were ones that I was familiar with. Other were ones that I had heard about that I heard were good. And then I was able to kind of do the different demos and figure out based on our hiring needs and the needs of the business, what was going to make the most sense.
Okay. And when you're starting that process of, implementing all these changes, prioritizing what you need to do first, how do you balance that with the delivery element? Because it sounds like you came into a position where there was open recs, there was recs that need to be filled. And a lot of time there's, the leadership are really focused on getting those people in and don't maybe understand the importance of putting good structure in place and putting all that process in, because that's more of a kind of mid to long-term gain. And they want to get that action and people in now. How do you balance that and how do you communicate, with the team that stuff is important too and make sure that it is on, you've got bandwidth to do that?
Yeah. I also started building out kind of the structured interview process and what that looks like. Like they had done a little bit of that, but they didn't have as much of that down, and going over that with them, coming up with a really streamlined process from start to finish, from sourcing to onboarding once the person is hired, and being able to show them the importance of that. So I think once the ATS system was implemented, then was able to go in there, start sourcing candidates really effectively, put them in the system. And then I personally sat down with my founder and talked about like what was our pitch in terms of getting candidates in the door and talking about like the culture. Because obviously culture is super important and you want to get the right hires in, because having the right hires in is going to impact the culture.
And so it sounds like you got that ATS in first. That was the first thing you did. And how did you've mentioned you kind of had some prior experience with some tools and you had some new stuff in. How did you go through that vetting process of, bringing in, you decided, okay, an ATS is something that we really need as a business and that's something that I need to get in quickly. How did you assess that and ultimately decide on the right choice?
Talentful provides flexible recruiting solutions to the world's most ambitious companies. Are you thinking about ways to add flexibility to your talent function? With recent market volatility and hiring set to return to growth mode in the near future, there's never been a better time to choose the right partner to help you scale. Talentful's embedded sourcing, recruiting, coordination, and talent advisory services have been trusted by the world's leading brands. Companies such as Atlassian, Microsoft, Expedia, Pinterest, Waymo, and more. Whether you're hiring across engineering, go-to-market, or G&A, Talentful has got you covered. To find out how Talentful can help you, visit talentful.com.
Yeah. So I looked at, I think like 4 or 5 different ones. I ultimately ended up going with Greenhouse. That was what I used at my prior company, and we had just had a lot of success with that. They have really great reporting functions, just in terms of, and they have a really good candidate survey function as well, because that's obviously really important with hiring, being able to send out surveys and see how the interview process went for candidates. Were they happy? What could we improve on? So yeah, I think ultimately I went with Greenhouse because that was what I was comfortable with and familiar with, but they just have fantastic reporting functions, and then also they're integrated with a lot of different things as well.
And did you have like a checklist of these are the things I should be looking at on an ATS, and what would you recommend for other recruiting leaders that are in a similar position of things they should be looking out for when they're putting in a new ATS?
Yeah, so I think integration is important with different HR tools. Like Greenhouse, for example, is integrated with Checker, which we use for background checks. And at the time we were using Gusto for onboarding, but they also have an onboarding function as well. So I think that's really important, is the integration aspect. And then just what are the reporting tools and are they integrated with other things? Like, for example, at my last company, Pendo, we used Gem with Greenhouse for sourcing. And that was really great. And effective in terms of like sending out messages and things like that. But yeah, it's also integrated with LinkedIn Recruiter and other things.
So integrations, and I guess how it supports the kind of hiring that you're going to be doing in your business. And how important generally do you think tools are for a recruiting team? Like, do you think that it's necessary to have all these tools? And there's so many. You can look at the market and there's just like a plethora of tools and like fun stuff that you can use as a recruiting leader. Like, how important really is it? And I guess what's your viewpoint on tools? Because you could go crazy on them.
So I think it depends obviously on the size of the company too. I think tools are always important, especially with things like sourcing and just using data in general. Like I used to use Gem a lot and be able to pull specific data with like messages sent. And you can do this with LinkedIn Recruiter as well, but like, what are the response rates you're getting with the messages, and what can you do differently in terms of changing that? Like in Gem and some of the other tools, you can send on behalf of different stakeholders to get better response rate. So yeah, the tools are very important, but I think for a team of one myself, I can only manage so many, but I see the value in them.
Yeah. And, there's this process of, I guess, we just talked about how important tools are, how they can really, speed up efficiency and shorten time to hire and all that kind of stuff that ultimately leads to real business impact in the company. But I think some leaders struggle to, or find it difficult, maybe it's the first time doing it, of showing that value to their stakeholder and getting them to buy into why we need these tools. The reason why maybe folks were using Google Sheets or using Monday or Trello boards to run recruiting is because maybe they just don't know and they can't see the impact. How do you go about putting together kind of business cases and getting budget for these kind of tools? And I guess, can you talk through the process and how you'd maybe recommend other people could do that?
Yeah. So for me specifically, I did the different demos. I went to my CEO. I talked about pricing with him. I said, I think this is the best value in terms of what we're looking for, the gaps that we have. And then I use specific examples from talking to the different hiring managers. Like there had been roles that had been open for like over a year.
Wow.
Just because they didn't have any recruiting. They didn't have anybody owning that process. So they weren't able to fill roles in an efficient amount of time. Roles were suffering. The company was suffering because things were not happening on time. So I was able to pull that data specifically and say, by having this in place, we're going to be able to hire efficiently and more on time.
Excellent. And was your company using other methods of recruiting before you came on board, like agencies and things like that?
Yeah, they use some external agencies, so definitely saving a lot of money there as well.
I had never hear really people talk about this, but do you go in and kind of collect those invoices and maybe use that as a comparison of what they could be saving? Or
yeah, that's a good point. I didn't have those exact numbers, but I did say to my CEO at one point, like the cost of having an internal recruiter is going to be 5 or 6 external hires, depending on what the role is.
Yeah.
So it pays for itself. And same with getting an ATS system.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, coming on board in a company that, is kind of a greenfield project to some degree, you had experience in a bunch of other companies. But I'm sure there are things that maybe you haven't faced before in this environment, new challenges that you're not familiar with. How do you go about approaching those challenges when you're on your own? You haven't got maybe a team to lean on, or other TA people inside that business. So can you maybe talk to us about how you approach that, maybe a challenge that you faced and, a real example of how you overcame that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm involved in a lot of different networking groups, hire community, for example. I'm in the People Over Perks network and definitely talk to a lot of different talent acquisition leaders if there's specific things that come up that I have questions on. Like when I was starting to do demos of different softwares, I would reach out to people and get their opinion. Like, for example, we're hiring a product trainer right now and looking for a LMS system. And I've been reaching out to different people within my space to see what they recommend.
Nice.
So yeah, having that network to lean on is huge, especially when there's things I haven't faced before, and being a team of one is very lean. In terms of like a specific challenge, I'm trying to think of like one that comes to mind exactly. I think just in general, it was challenging to come into a role and have to build everything out from scratch.
Yeah.
And having to kind of come up with a recruiter playbook and coming up with what I said, what are the core competencies for each role? What does each hiring manager looking for? So that was pretty challenging in itself, just to be able to build that out and being able to scale the company.
Yeah. How did you go about that core competency stuff? That we skipped over that before, but it's really interesting. Like, how did you approach that? Did you get advice from other people? Or you took a framework from somewhere else? Like, how did you do that?
Yeah, I think built off of what I've known from other companies and scaling there. And then also just talking to other talent leaders, just in terms of like, what are some of the core things that people look for during interviews, how to reduce bias, things like that.
And how important do you think it is to get those done, straight off the bat? And how has it helped your process, at placements?
I think it's super important for us. I mean, we had nothing in place. So being able to build it out, and obviously it's still kind of a work in progress. There's still a lot we can obviously tweak and improve and make better, but you need to have that in order to see success. And then also in order for the candidates on that side to have a great kind of recruiting process and interview process, it needs to be really structured and tight.
What were they doing before? Just kind of randomly interviewing without any structure and being a bit more like loose about it?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, they would do interview panels and had case studies, but it wasn't like a super formalized process.
Yeah.
And there wasn't like focus areas in the interview panels or anything like that.
Do you feel like, after implementing that, the team are seeing like an improvement in quality of hire and the people they're bringing on?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
My CEO actually spoke to me a couple weeks ago about raising the bar, how much we've raised the bar
that's
since I
awesome.
started. And yeah, so that was really, really rewarding to hear.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, and I think from a lot of like founding teams, recruiting isn't their core specialism,
Hmm.
and I think people just assume, oh yeah, we just bring people in, we interview them, and bring them into the business. And when you do implement structure like you have, it can make such a big impact,
Yeah,
to an organization, the quality they can bring in.
absolutely.
And I
I'll
love,
also say I've been using AI more,
mm,
which has helped a lot. Like in terms of job descriptions, helping with case studies.
mm,
I use Read AI for interviews to record them.
mm,
So that's been really helpful.
yeah. So I guess that can speed up a lot of the work you're doing, especially being on your own.
Exactly.
Yeah. Read AI, is that like a note taker?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And what do you do with that information once you've got it?
Go through my notes, see if there's anything specific
Mhm.
I missed, and then also helping me in improving
Yeah.
like screens and what else I can look out for. We also record case studies, and then that can help us
Mm.
like improving them down the line. Like
Yeah.
if we're going to come out with a new case study for a new role.
Yeah. Have you noticed any improvements you've been able to make because of the note taking? Any things that have been flagged or any trends that you've seen over time? Yeah.
I think in general, the survey results have gotten better from the candidate experience surveys. Like I noticed certain people maybe would flag certain things in interviews or say it wasn't challenging enough or
Mm.
something like that, and it's improved significantly. So
Mm.
I think all of the AI tools definitely help significantly.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting in terms of what's going to be the landscape of recruiting tech in the next few years.
Yeah,
I think it has the ability to make our jobs like way more interesting and also kind of automate the stuff we don't like doing so much, and
yeah,
actually speak more with human beings and less
exactly.
admin, which is really awesome. Now, you obviously, we just talked about a kind of team of one at the moment, but I'm sure the company has ambitions to scale and maybe will do in the future. How do you think about, I'm sure, building your team? Like, have you set kind of a capacity model about, once you hit a certain hiring velocity, you kind of bring some people on, or you look at different solutions? Like, how are you thinking about that? And I guess for other leaders that are in this position where you're managing the whole function, making sure they don't get to a point where they're behind the curve and they're too stretched, and just can't handle the growth of the company. How are you thinking about that?
Yeah. So actually, originally when I started, I was doing all of recruiting and HR, and then eventually it got to the point where we were doing so much hiring and doing so much onboarding that I wasn't able to take that on. So then I made a point to hire an HR generalist.
Right.
So she helps with the onboarding and the offboarding and benefits and things like that. So I think if we continue to scale and it gets to the point where I can't handle
Mm-hmm.
all of the recs, then we hire maybe a sourcer or another recruiter.
Yeah.
So it just really depends also on what types of roles. Like if we're hiring a ton of salespeople,
Mm-hmm.
hiring like a go-to-market recruiter. If we're doing more like engineering and product, then hire a more technical recruiter to help.
Yeah. And do you have a typical kind of model that you think about when, like you can handle, let's say 10 open recs at any one time? Once it gets to
Yeah.
13, you need to think about someone else. And then, you can give X amount to one recruiter once they get to a capacity. Do you have like a out of the box kind of rough idea that I'm just thinking for maybe other people who are thinking about this, like having an idea of like a model in their head, what that could look like?
Yeah. I'd say 8 to 10 is the sweet spot.
Mhm.
If you go over that, it gets pretty challenging.
Yeah.
And you either need to think about hiring another recruiter or maybe using an external
Mhm.
agency if it's like a very maybe niche or specific role that you
Mhm.
don't have the bandwidth to take on.
Yeah. And I think, there's lots of different options for recruiting, like you just mentioned. You could either, you could use recruitment agencies, you could use contractors, you could hire
Yeah.
FTEs, use embedded RPOs, whatever. For you, like, what's the determining factor of like when you use what solution? I guess, how would you think about that?
Yeah. So there's definitely been one-off situations like when we're hiring in Singapore
Mm.
where that's really challenging with the time difference.
Yeah.
So we've used maybe an external agency for that, or if it's a very niche role that I don't have as much experience with, I think that's generally when we turn more to agencies. But I think if we continue scaling, if we do more fundraising, then we'll get to the point where we need to grow the TA team.
Mm-hmm. And how do you think about, I guess one question is, how do you go about hiring, that recruiting team? Like, how would you go about it? Would you put job adverts? Would you source? Would you, and what kind of shape? I'm hearing a lot more talent leaders looking for less like super specialized people. And like, let's say they've only done second product, but people who have that ability to be adaptable because of the landscape shifting so much over the last few years. You want people who can pivot inside your organization. I don't know how you think about that and how you go about hiring a new team member.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, I think somebody who can take on a lot of different functions is super important, especially with a startup with things always changing.
Yeah.
You have to be able to be very adaptable.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I think it kind of depends. Maybe if we were doing a lot of scaling with engineering or product, I would opt for that.
Yeah.
Just because my experience generally is more on the go-to-market
Mm-hmm.
Gen Ops side. But yeah, I mean, I think we actually revamped our website recently.
Mm-hmm.
So we've seen a lot more applicants that way, which has been exciting.
Nice.
Yes.
And that's been applicants for your general positions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. And what do you think, was that just like a brand refresh? Was it that you didn't have a careers page before and now you do? What do you think's, or you've worked on your employer brand? Like what's...
Yeah, so it all tied into employer branding
Right.
and talent branding. And I also worked really closely with our product marketing person in terms of the careers page and setting up like what our benefits look like and everything so that it's compelling and attractive to candidates.
Interesting. So you've seen a big increase from kind of not really focusing on that to doing that. And have you done any other marketing around your careers or anything, or it's just literally that one change?
We've done more blog posts.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's been super helpful. Posting it on LinkedIn, posting it on Facebook and things like that.
Interesting.
So definitely seen a lot more traction that way.
And are you getting high quality applications, would you say?
Yes, we used to get applicants that were not high quality and it's really gone up a lot. So I think the website is a huge part of that.
Yeah. That's really interesting because I don't think a lot of like earlier stage companies focus enough on employer branding.
Yeah.
And if you start early, I think it's actually a good idea because, if you want to be, I guess, like watch your costs and how you have to scale your teams and how you have to use different tools and platforms, having inbound leads helps you reduce your costs, really.
Exactly.
Because you're not having to go out and source all these candidates,
yeah.
Especially if you can bring in high quality. I'm wondering, do you think the market is still quite, I guess, soft at the moment? Like there's a lot of people out of work, and it's
definitely improving.
You think it's improving?
Yeah, from how it was maybe a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there's more jobs opening up. There's less people on the market.
Yeah. So
it's definitely improved substantially.
Yeah, I agree. I'm really interested to see, I really hope it doesn't go back to 21, 22.
Yeah.
That was just the other side of being insane.
Exactly.
But I'm really interested to see what the next 12 months brings. It does feel like, just speaking to like talent leaders, there's a bit of optimism now.
Yep.
Before like the last 12 months, people have just been, every time I've spoken to someone, like, oh, it's terrible,
Yeah.
Really, negative talk about what's happening with their teams and headcount. But now that there seems to be a bit of a momentum shift for sure. So fingers crossed it's going to be good for TA.
Exactly.
Now, a lot of people are maybe in the position that you're in, but haven't hired a team before. They're not, maybe they've managed recruiters, but they've never been in charge of bringing them into the business. And I definitely see, when that's the first time someone's going through that, it's very easy to make mistakes in bringing in recruitment talent.
Yep.
Because I think some people maybe opt for just logos on CVs, or they look for, these quite cliche things that don't really determine if someone is a good recruiter or not. And I think especially for, an early stage company that maybe doesn't have the biggest brand like a Google or a Facebook, you need a different skill set because, at one of those companies, they have this huge brand behind them where they're getting tons of inbound. You have to be a bit more scrappy at a startup. So are there kind of 3 things or a couple of things that you would recommend people really focus on when they're thinking about bringing their first recruiter into their team?
Yeah, I think this goes for hiring, recruiting, but just hiring in general at a startup. We definitely are more of the approach of being more critical with hiring and taking a slower approach to make sure we get the right person in the door rather than just hiring to hire because you don't want to make a mistake and have to start all over again. That's very costly for the company.
Yeah.
So we definitely take that approach with hiring in general. And I would do the same if I was hiring a recruiter. I would just want to make sure I get the right person in the door.
And do you think about, like coordination as a separate skill set? Would you think about coordination eventually, or would you just see your recruitment team handling that for the foreseeable and managing full end to end? Do you think it's necessary to have that like dedicated coordination?
Yes. So now my my CEO's EA helps with with coordination, which is great. So I'm not doing it all. But I think, as you continue to scale and have a lot of different roles, you definitely need a recruiting coordinator because it's a lot of work.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you tried any of the like automation tools? Like I think there's like Good Time and there's a few other tools out there that do candidate scheduling.
Yes.
Have you had any experience with those?
I've used Calendly, but Calendly's great. I use that for setting up recruiting screens. I just send out my link. And then with Greenhouse, we can just send out like specific times for different people, which is really helpful.
Nice, yeah. Yeah, I've heard, I forgot the name, Modern Loop, I think. I've heard, I keep getting people talk about how good that is as a platform. It handles all the like rescheduling and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, nice.
Between diaries.
I'll have to check that out.
Yeah. So I wondered, how much recruiting operations is going to be automated, in the future. That's going to be a really interesting point. And I guess for you, the kind of final point here is, how much do you see AI and technology changing the work that you do and your team does?
I think it's going to be really significant just in terms of reducing time, making things more efficient, helping with streamlined processes. I'm already seeing saving a lot of time with doing things. So I'm excited about the future of AI and how it's going to help talent acquisition.
What's the most useful way that AI has helped you in your current role?
I think with job descriptions and case studies, just because a lot of times the hiring managers will rely on me to help with that. And I'm juggling so many different things and have so many different priorities going on that can take a lot of time. Yeah. So that's been super helpful.
So that's an example is you kind of, let's say you have a mobile C++ engineer just randomly, you would say, start me off a job spec for this, and it would give you an outline that you can then start from. Is that how you're using it?
Yeah, or sometimes we have old, outdated ones. Okay. And the hiring manager will send it to me and say, this is what we used 4 years ago, but I need to update it. I need to tweak it. I need to add this technology. And then I can go in and use that as a starting point.
Oh, nice.
And do that, yeah.
So you upload it into ChatGPT. Oh, awesome.
Exactly.
And then the case studies, are these things like tasks, like interview tasks and presentations and stuff like this? So you would say, if there was a sales leader coming in, you'd ask ChatGPT, give me an example of a sales leadership task in an interview, and then it would provide that. Is that how you're doing that?
Yeah, or my CEO wanted me to build out a specific case study, using another prompt, but with a new role. Okay. So it helped with that. So yeah, it's very efficient. It makes makes things a lot easier.
Nice. And so, thinking about all your experience so far, from kind of coming into this environment, having nothing, to where you are today, what are the top things that you would advise and you would give to a talent leader coming into the same position?
Strategy is important. What is your overall strategy? Thinking about the different metrics, and then obviously KPIs. And then just talking about what are the company values? What is the mission statement of the company? And tying everything together. And then when you have that, then it makes easier when you start sourcing and you start pitching candidates, and you can tell a really compelling story about the company.
Awesome. And what are you most excited about? We might have touched on it with some of the AI stuff, but what are you most excited about regarding the future of TA?
I think a few different things. I think candidate experience is continuing to improve and get better. So excited about that. And for me, I like doing the candidate surveys and being able to see what I'm doing well, what I can improve on. And obviously D&I is still really important. That's a big focus for us right now. And we're starting to do more with affinity groups and things like that as we continue to grow.
Nice. How are you thinking about how are you approaching DEI in the moment? Are you trying to bring in underrepresented groups? How are you approaching that?
Yeah, we're bringing in underrepresented groups, focus more on hiring women in different things like sales and product and engineering, where there's not as much of a presence with that.
Nice. And you said you're focusing on specific groups to help you bring candidates in.
So we do something called affinity groups, which I had at my last 2 companies as well, where it would be like women get together specifically or different groups to talk about different topics. And that's been really effective. Yeah, because we've scaled significantly. When I started, we were 40 employees, and now I think we're over 60.
And are these groups internally or external?
Internally, yeah.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
And they help bring like referrals, and they're on interview panels and all that
Exactly.
kind of stuff. Okay.
Yeah, that's another thing is we built out a referral reward program and definitely seen the fruits of that labor as well.
Awesome. How do you incentivize that? Do you do anything regarding incentives?
There's a reward for it.
Reward, okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
But there was really no one was getting referred before that. So
nice. Well, that's great to see, 'cause I think that the data's out there that shows that that's the highest quality in terms of conversion to offer, right?
exactly. Yeah. And that reduces the time of hiring as well.
Absolutely. Awesome. So I guess to wrap stuff up, where can people find you? Where can they find the company? Any more information that might be helpful?
Yeah. Placements.io is the website. It's completely revamped now. So there's a lot more information on there. I'm on LinkedIn, Alexa Lane. So you can find me on there.
Awesome. So yeah, we can go and check out that new career site that everyone's applying to.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for tuning in to Hiring on All Cylinders, and don't forget to follow and subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. Thank you.